$100. That's what you just paid to get your dog washed, brushed, trimmed, and sent home smelling like lavender. 45 minutes of work, maybe an hour. Do the math and it looks almost embarrassing, like the groomer is quietly getting rich off shampoo and scissors. Here's the problem with that math. The person who spent the last hour on their feet, pinning down a nervous Labrador, dodging its back leg, holding its head still with one hand while running clippers with the other. She probably kept about $12 of your $100. The person making the least money in this transaction is the one actually touching the dog. Here's what makes grooming look like such an easy business to get into. The barrier is almost nothing. You don't need a degree. You don't need a bank loan. You don't need to convince anyone you're worth hiring. Most grooming schools run a matter of weeks, not years. Some programs get you certified and working with real dogs in under 4 months. Compare that to a nursing degree, a plumber's apprenticeship, even a cosmetology license in most states, and grooming looks like a shortcut. Pay a small fee, learn to hold clippers safely, and within a season you can be standing at a table charging strangers $100 a head. And if you don't want to pay for school at all, there's an even more tempting door. The big chains will train you for free. PetSmart, Petco, walk into either one, and somewhere in the store, there's a poster promising a real career, paid while you learn, no tuition required. For someone with no capital and no connections, that's not just appealing. It's the whole pitch. You don't need to save up. You don't need to take on debt. You just need to show up. Now compare that to the other way in. Opening your own salon. That path is a different animal entirely. You're not just learning to trim a poodle. You're renting a storefront, buying dryers and tables and disinfecting equipment and betting that customers show up on day one. And the math doesn't forgive slow starts. A 2-groomer salon typically needs somewhere between 12 and 16 appointments a day just to cover its bills, and 20 to 25 before it's actually making real money. That's not a hobby-sized commitment. That's payroll, rent, and utilities due on the first of the month whether or not the phone rings. So there are really 2 doors into this business. One asks for real capital and real risk, in exchange for keeping whatever the business earns. The other asks for nothing up front at all. No tuition, no lease, no risk in exchange for a job. For most people standing at the entrance to this industry, that second door looks like the obvious choice. Free training. A paycheck from week 1. No debt. That word free is doing a lot of work in that sentence. And it's worth remembering because it's about to come back around. Let's actually follow the $100. Not the sticker price, where it goes once it lands in the register. Start with the obvious slice. Supplies. Shampoo, conditioner, ear cleaner, cotton balls, blade oil. The occasional replacement blade when one gets dull mid-groom. This is the smallest bite out of the $100. Usually somewhere in the single digits as a percentage. Nobody's getting rich or going broke over the cost of dog shampoo. It's rounding error. The real story starts with labor, because labor is the biggest single expense a grooming business carries by a wide margin. In a small shop, staff pay typically eats somewhere between 45 and 55% of total revenue. In bigger, higher volume salons that run more efficiently, it can drop to 35 to 45%. Either way, more than a third and often closer to half of every dollar that comes in the door is earmarked for the people actually doing the grooming before the business owner sees a cent of profit. Then there's rent. If the salon sits somewhere with good foot traffic, a strip mall near a park, a storefront in a walkable neighborhood, that convenience isn't free. Urban rent alone can swallow 15 to 20% of total revenue. That's before utilities, before insurance, before the water bill for running a dozen dogs through the tub every day. So already, before we've even gotten to profit, we're looking at something like 60 to 70% of that $100 gone. Split between the person doing the work and the building they're doing it in. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the base groom, the wash, the brush out, the haircut, is actually not where the real money lives. The real money lives in the add-ons, nail trims, teeth brushing, de-shedding treatments, specialty conditioning for a dog with a skin condition. These extras carry margins of 40 to 60%, almost double what the base groom itself typically returns, which sits closer to 25 to 35% margin. And add-ons aren't a rounding error either. Across a well-run salon, they can make up 20 to 30% of total revenue. Sit with that for a second. The haircut is the thing you're paying for. The nail trim is the thing that's actually keeping the lights on. This is why you'll notice every groomer, every front desk person, every appointment booking flow gently nudges you toward the deluxe package instead of the basic wash. It's not upselling for the sake of upselling. It's that the deluxe package is where the actual margin lives, and the basic wash is closer to a loss leader that gets the dog through the door. Add it all up. Supplies out, labor out, rent out, and whatever's left after add-ons subsidize the base service, and the number that survives to the bottom line, the actual profit the owner walks away with, is usually somewhere between 10 and 20% of total revenue. Not of the $100 groom specifically, of everything the salon takes in across a month. Some particularly well-run operations, especially mobile ones with no storefront to pay for, can push past that. But for a typical brick-and-mortar salon, 10 to 20% net margin is the honest range. Now here's the number that should stop you. A typical grooming salon in America brings in somewhere between $80,000 and $250,000 a year in total revenue. That's real money moving through the register. And yet the national average pay for the actual groomer, the person whose hands are on the dog for every single one of those appointments, sits around $25,000 a year. Some sources put it lower, closer to hourly wages in the $17 to $18 range once you annualize it. A salon can be pulling in $250,000 a year, and the person generating every dollar of that by standing at a table 8 hours a day is bringing home barely above minimum wage. That gap is the whole story of this business. It's not that grooming isn't profitable. Clearly, somebody's making money, because the industry as a whole is worth well over $10 billion a year in the U.S. and growing at a healthy clip. It's that the profit and the labor got separated somewhere along the way. The salon captures the spread between what a $100 groom brings in and what it costs to have someone perform it. The groomer captures whatever's left after rent, supplies, and the owner's cut have already been taken out. And unlike a lot of service businesses, there's no obvious lever to pull here to fix that gap. You can't groom faster without risking hurting the dog or yourself. You can't groom 2 dogs at once. You can't automate the actual haircut. The only thing that can move is how the pie gets split between the person doing the work and everyone standing between that person and the customer. Which raises the real question. If the money's clearly there, if a salon is genuinely bringing in 6 figures a year, why does the person actually doing the grooming so often end up with the smallest slice of it? The answer isn't about greed exactly. It's about something more structural. It's about what happens when a business's entire output depends on 2 human hands. And there's a hard ceiling on how many dogs those 2 hands can physically get through in a day. That ceiling is where this story really begins. Here's the thing about grooming that makes it fundamentally different from almost every other small business on this channel so far. Take a car wash. Once you've built the tunnel, one machine can wash 300 cars a day without getting tired. Take a coffee shop. With enough machines and enough staff behind the counter, you can push volume up significantly during a morning rush. Even a gym, which sells the same locker room and the same treadmills to thousands of people, scales its revenue almost independently of how many people actually show up on any given day. Grooming doesn't work like that. Grooming is bottlenecked by something you cannot buy more of. A human being's 2 hands and 1 clock. A full groom. The bath, the blow-dry, the brush-out, the haircut, the nail trim. Calming a dog that's never been in this position in its life takes somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a half of continuous, hands-on, skilled physical work. One person can only do this so many times before their body simply runs out of hours in the day. Industry data puts the realistic ceiling at somewhere between 4 and 8 full grooms per groomer per day. Push past that and you're not scaling the business. You're grinding down the person doing it. This is the trap, and it's a different kind of trap than we've seen in this format before. It's not that costs are quietly eating margin behind the scenes. It's that the entire revenue engine of this business has a hard, physical ceiling that no amount of marketing, no amount of demand, No amount of $100 pricing can push past. You cannot 10x a groomer's output the way you can 10x a laundromat's output by adding more machines. The machine, in this business, is a person. And people get tired, get injured, and eventually burn out. So if the ceiling on revenue per groomer is fixed, what's left for anyone hoping to grow profit off the back of that labor? There's only one lever. Control what share of that groomer's capped output actually goes to the groomer. That's exactly what commission structures do. Instead of paying a flat wage, many chains pay groomers a percentage of what each groom brings in. Piece rate pay, essentially. On paper, this sounds fair. Work harder, earn more. But because the ceiling on how many dogs one person can groom in a day is fixed no matter how hard they work, commission pay doesn't actually reward extra effort past a certain point. It just determines how the fixed pie gets split between the person cutting hair and the company that owns the building they're cutting it in. And once you understand that the split is the only thing anyone can actually control, the incentive becomes obvious. Keep as many groomers as possible on the lowest end of that split, for as long as possible. This is where training comes back into the story. Remember that free training we talked about in part 2? Free training isn't just a nice recruiting tool. If a company can get someone through the door with the promise of zero upfront cost, then structure their contract so that leaving early comes with a real financial penalty, they've solved a problem that has nothing to do with teaching someone to groom a poodle. They've solved a retention problem. They've made it expensive to walk away from a low-commission tier. Right at the moment a groomer might otherwise start shopping around for a better split somewhere else. It's a strange kind of business. The revenue ceiling is fixed by the human body. The only thing that isn't fixed is who gets to decide how that capped revenue is divided. And increasingly, that decision gets locked in before the groomer even picks up a pair of clippers for the first time. One company built exactly this system, and when a real groomer tried to walk away from it, the numbers on the page turned into a debt she actually had to pay. In July of 2022, a woman named Brianne Scally filed a lawsuit that pulled back the curtain on exactly how this works. Scally had worked as a bather and groomer at a PetSmart in Salinas, California. Like thousands of people before her, she walked in with no money, no experience, and no debt, and walked out with the us in the company's grooming academy, advertised as free training toward a real career. Here's what free actually meant in the fine print. When groomers enrolled in the academy, they signed something called a training repayment agreement provision, a trap, fittingly enough. The contract required them to take on $5,000 of debt tied to their training, stay 2 years, and the debt disappeared entirely. Leave after 1 year, and you still owed $2,500. Leave any earlier than that, and the full $5,000 came due. And this wasn't debt for years of specialized instruction from a dedicated teacher in a real classroom. According to the lawsuit, trainees were often grooming paying customers' dogs almost immediately, with limited supervision, learning largely by doing and by watching more experienced groomers work. Even after finishing training, the math didn't get easier fast. New groomers were required to complete 200 supervised grooms at their hourly rate, with no commission at all. Then came 6 more months of work before commission kicked in for the first time. Altogether, it could take more than a year of employment before a groomer started earning above minimum wage. Scally was paid $15 an hour. She lasted 7 months before she couldn't make ends meet and quit, trading a promised career for a debt she now owed the company that trained her. She wasn't alone. In 2025, Colorado's Attorney General filed a separate lawsuit against PetSmart over the same practice, alleging that between 2019 and 2022, the company referred at least 21 Colorado workers to a debt collection agency. After they left before their 2 years were up, at least 8 of them ended up with the debt marked on their credit reports, a permanent financial scar for quitting a job that paid barely above minimum wage in the first place. Read that again. Groomers weren't just losing a job they didn't want anymore. Some of them were losing their credit standing over it. Now hold this next to everything from part 3. A grooming salon can pull in $250,000 a year. The industry as a whole is worth more than $10 billion annually and growing. There is real money in this business. Nobody's disputing that. What the PetSmart case exposes is where the incentive actually points once you understand the labor siling problem from Part 4. If a groomer's output is capped no matter what, and the only lever left is what share of that output they get to keep, then the most effective way to protect your share isn't to pay people better. It's to make it expensive for them to leave before you've extracted enough value from their capped, underpaid labor to make the training worthwhile. A free education wasn't a gift. It was a down payment on 2 years of a workforce that couldn't afford to walk. And to be fair to PetSmart here, this wasn't framed internally as trapping anyone. Training programs are genuinely expensive to run, and companies do have a real cost to recoup when someone quits early. But the structure tells its own story regardless of intent. When the only way to protect margin is locking in low-wage labor with the threat of debt collection, that's not a training program anymore. That's a retention strategy wearing a training program's name. So if the groomer isn't the one winning here, and it's not obviously the small salon either, squeezed to 10 or 20% margin after rent and payroll, then who actually comes out ahead in this business? So who actually wins in this business? Not the groomer. We've already seen that number, $25,000 a year on average, generated inside a business that can pull in 10 times that. Not the small independent salon owner either. Most of the time, after rent, after supplies, after paying staff nearly half of every dollar that comes in, most owners are walking away with 10 to 20% net margin. Real money, but nowhere near what the $100 price tag makes it look like from the outside. The real winner is whoever sits above the labor ceiling instead of being bound by it. For a corporate chain, the grooming counter isn't really the business. It's a foot traffic engine. Every dog dropped off for a groom is an owner walking past aisles of food, toys, and treats, twice on the way in and the way out. The groom itself doesn't need to be wildly profitable on its own. It just needs to be cheap enough to run, and its labor stable enough to staff, that it keeps pulling people through the front door. And when the workforce doing that labor is locked in with training debt instead of simply paid enough to stay, that's not a side effect. That's the business model working as designed. Best case, if you're the one holding the clippers, you build a loyal client base fast, go independent, and eventually own the chair instead of renting your time on someone else's. Worst case, you sign the free training agreement, spend a year earning close to minimum wage, and owe money the day you decide the job isn't for you. So the next time you drop $100 for a haircut on a dog that took 90 seconds to shake off, remember what that $100 is actually buying. It's not paying for scissors and shampoo. It's paying off someone else's debt to keep working there at all.